There is a silence in a house after the fighting is done. It's a different silence from the quiet of a sleeping child, or the peace of a morning cup of tea alone. This silence is thick. It has weight. It presses against the eardrums, against the windows, against the very soul of the home. It's the silence of a bridge, burned. The ashes are still warm, and you are standing in the center, the one who struck the match. They tell you that a mother's heart is a bottomless well, that her love is an infinite resource, like sunlight or the turn of the tides. We are the givers, the nurturers, the safe harbor in every storm. We are the keepers of the secrets, the healers of the scraped knees, the menders of the broken toys and, later, the broken hearts. But what they don't tell you, what no one prepares you for, is the day you look into that well and see only the dry, cracked earth at the bottom. The day you realize you have given so much of yourself away that there is nothing left but an echo, a hollow space where your own name used to be. This, ere what I am about to tell you, is not a story of vengeance. It is not a tale of a wicked mother or ungrateful son. It is a confession, a roar, unvarnished truth spoken into this heavy silence. It is the story of a woman who, at the age of 67, committed the most unforgivable act a mother can conceive of. I took the future I had promised my only child, the son I had raised alone, the man I had built my entire world around, and I sold it. Pause. The rain intensifies slightly. I sold his inheritance. I sold his security. I sold the very foundations of what he believed was his rightful legacy. And in doing so, I found my soul. To understand the fall, you must first see the tower as it once stood. You must see the bricks that were laid, one by one, over a lifetime. My name, well, my name doesn't matter. For most of my life, I was a Michael's wife. And then, for even longer, I was a David's mother. The woman I was before those titles. Sarah, she had slowly faded, like a photograph left in the sun. Michael, his name still catches in my throat, even after all these years. He was solid, like oak. He had a laugh that started deep in his chest and rumbled out, a sound that could warm a room. We were young, so terribly young, and so desperately in love. We bought the beach house as a ridiculous act of faith. It was a shack, a weathered, salt-crusted thing that groaned in the wind. But to us, it was a palace. We spent our weekends there, covered in paint, our muscles aching, our hearts so full we thought they would burst. We'd fall asleep on a mattress on the floor, listening to the ocean, his hand resting on my stomach, dreaming of the family we would fill this noisy, drafty palace with. David was born there, not in a hospital, but on the living room floor, in a pool of lamplight and my own fierce, primal strength. Michael held my hand, his face pale and terrified and full of more wonder than I have ever seen in a human being before or since. When they placed David on my chest, this squalling, messy, perfect creature, the world narrowed to that single point. The three of us. A trinity. The holy family of this little kingdom by the sea. The apartment complex came later. It was Michael's idea. A legacy. Sarah, he'd said, his eyes bright with plans. Something solid for him, for his future. It was 4 units, a practical, unglamorous building that represented sacrifice. We poured our extra money, our extra time, our extra energy into it. It was for David. Everything was for David. I had to become both mother and father, the giver and the protector. I worked. I managed the apartments. I made sure David had everything. Everything his father would have wanted for him. I attended every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every graduation. I was a pillar of strength. But pillars, you see, they don't bend. They just stand there, holding up the weight, until one day, they crack. David grew into a man. A handsome, intelligent man. He went to a good college, got a degree in business. He married Chloe. She was beautiful, sharp, ambitious. She had a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, but I ignored that. I was so desperate for him to be happy, to be settled. I saw her as the new pillar who would help him hold up his world. The first request was small. A loan. The down payment for their first home. It wasn't a request, not really. It was a presentation. They sat at my kitchen table, the same table where David had done his homework, with spreadsheets and amortization schedules. It's a sound investment, Mom, David said, using a tone I'd never heard from him before, a corporate, slightly condescending tone. I wrote the check. The feeling in my chest wasn't joy. It was a vague, unsettling sense of being a line item on a budget. Then it was the car. My SUV. It's so much safer, Mom. For when we have children, the mythical grandchildren, the ultimate trump card. I handed over the keys. I told myself it was love, but deep down, in a place I was too afraid to visit, I knew it was something else. It was exhaustion. It was the path of least resistance. They started talking about the beach house. It began as ideas. Wouldn't it be wonderful to open up this wall? To put in a glass door here? To modernize it? Their ideas as slowly became plans. They brought over magazines, fabric swatches, architectural drawings. They talked about it with such possession, such unshakable certainty, that I began to feel like a ghost in my own home, a custodian of a museum they were planning to renovate. One night, we were there, on the porch. The same porch where Michael and I had dreamed, where David had taken his first steps. Chloe was sipping her wine, looking out at the water. Once the title is transferred, as she said, so casually, so offhandedly, we can break ground in spring. The words landed in the pit of my stomach like stones. I looked at my son. He was nodding, looking at the drawings, a faint, proud smile on his face. He didn't look at me. He didn't see the blood drain from my face. He didn't see the way my hand tightened on the arm of my rocking chair, the one Michael had built for me when I was pregnant. In that moment, the architecture of my entire life became clear. I was the temporary steward, the placeholder, the keeper of the assets until the real owners were ready to take possession. My love, my sacrifices, my entire identity as a mother, it had all been reduced to a financial strategy, a long-term holding pattern. I went home that night and I did not sleep. I sat in the dark, in Michael's chair, and I listened to the new silence. It wasn't the silence of his absence anymore. It was the silence of my own erasure, and in that profound, terrifying quiet, a question formed. It was a small, fragile thing at first, a whisper from a self I thought had died with Michael. What about me? The decision to sell the apartment complex wasn't a decision. It was a tremor, a foreshock of the earthquake to come. It was the easiest of the three, the one least tied to my soul. It was business. It was the safety net Michael had left me, and I was tired of feeling guilty for needing it. I called a realtor from the next town over, a woman with a brisk, no-nonsense voice. When she came to appraise it, she saw bricks and mortar, potential, and square footage. She didn't see the ghost of a young husband and wife painting walls at midnight, dreaming of their son's future. She didn't see the years of fixing leaky faucets and dealing with difficult tenants, all to keep that monthly check coming in. To her, it was a commodity, and for the first time, I allowed myself to see it that way, too. The sale was swift, clinical. The money landed in my bank account, a number with more zeros than I had ever seen. It felt, or abstract. It didn't feel like freedom yet. It felt like a secret. But the beach house was my heart. Selling it would be a kind of self-mutilation. How do you put a price on the air that you first breathed love into? How do you sell the floorboards that held the weight of your greatest joy, your most profound grief? I drove there one Tuesday morning, in the slow, grey light of dawn. The world was quiet, the tourists still asleep. I walked through the rooms alone. I ran my hand over the kitchen countertop, stained with rings from 1,000 wine glasses. I stood in the doorway of the room where David was born, and I could still feel the echo of that seismic, life-altering power. I sat on the porch and listened to the familiar groan of the wood, the one Michael had always meant to fix. And I cried. I cried for Michael. I cried for the young, hopeful versions of ourselves who had built this dream. I cried for the little boy with sandy feet and a gap-teethed smile. I cried for the woman I had been, the one who believed in the fairy tale of family, of legacy. But then, as the sun began to break over the water, turning the grey sky to peach and gold, a different thought emerged. What if a legacy isn't a thing you leave? What if it's a life you live? Michael's legacy wasn't this rotting wood and peeling paint. It was the love we shared. It was the strength he gave me. It was the son we raised. Those things were mine to keep, forever. They couldn't be sold. This house, it had become a tomb. A beautiful, salt air-filled tomb, but a tomb nonetheless. It was a monument to a past that was holding me hostage. David and Chloe didn't want the memories. They wanted the location. They wanted to scrub my history from its walls and paint over it with their own modern, minimalist aesthetic. If I gave it to them, I would be complicit in the murder of my own past. So, I made the call. My hand trembled as I dialed the realtor's number. My voice was steady, but inside, I was screaming. I was betraying everyone. Michael, David, the ghost of that young mother on the floor. I was a vandal, desecrating my own sacred ground. 3 for sale. A sign going into the ground was like a knife to the chest. I watched from my car, hidden by the dunes, as the young couple who would eventually buy it walked through. They were in their 30s, holding hands. She was a potter, he was a writer. They didn't see a teardown. They saw character. They saw light. They saw a future for their own dreams. The woman pointed to the wobbly porch step and laughed, a sound of pure delight, not derision. And in that moment, I felt a tiny, unexpected flicker of earpiece. I wasn't destroying something. I was passing it on. I was giving it to people who would breathe new life into its old bones, who would love it not for its potential resale value, but for its soul. I signed the final papers in a sterile lawyer's office. The pen felt heavy as an anchor, but when I set it down, a weight lifted from my shoulders. A weight I had been carrying for so long, I had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. The guilt was there, a cold, hard stone in my gut, but it was joined by something else, something I hadn't felt in decades: agency. I had made a choice. A terrible, painful, selfish choice. But it was my choice. I knew the storm was coming. I had sold the pillars of my son's expected future. I had dismantled the architecture of his entitlement. He would see it as an act of war. I went home, to my quiet, empty house, and I waited. I didn't tidy up. I didn't prepare a speech. I just Saturday, and I waited for the tsunami of his rage to break over me. He did not disappoint. The door didn't just open. It exploded inwards, slamming against the wall with a sound like a gunshot. The pictures on the hallway wall rattled, and there he was. My son, David. But it wasn't him. It was a caricature of him, his face twisted by a fury so pure it was almost beautiful in its ugliness. What? He roared. The word wasn't a question. It was a weapon. You sold the apartment? I already promised it to my wife. Give me the money. Spittle flew from his lips. His eyes were wild, unfocused. He was a stranger, a man possessed by the demon of his own thwarted expectation. He stood there, dripping rainwater onto the hall rug, his chest heaving. A strange calm settled over me. This was the moment I had dreaded, had played out in my nightmares 100 times. And now that it was here, I felt nothing. I was an observer, watching a play I had already read. I stayed perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. I looked at him, really looked at him, past the rage, past the man, to the little boy I had sung to sleep. And I saw the fear underneath, the terror of a plan gone awry. I've got another piece of news, I said. My voice was quiet, flat, a still pond after his crashing wave. The confusion that flickered across his face was almost comical. Another piece? What other piece could there possibly be? The apartment was the cornerstone. What could be worse? So I told him. I didn't dress it up. I didn't soften it. I sold the beach house, too. The sale closed this morning. The transformation was physical, instantaneous. The red, rage-filled face drained of all its color, leaving a pale, waxy mask. His shoulders, which had been tensed for a fight, slumped. The anger vanished, replaced by a dawning, abject horror. He looked like a little boy who had just watched his favorite toy, his most cherished possession, be deliberately smashed before his eyes. He took a stumbling step backward, his hand reaching for the doorframe to steady himself. He whispered, and the sound was so small, so broken, it was almost swallowed by the storm outside. But, my wife and I, we don't have a place to live now, Mom. Mom. He hadn't called me that in years. It was always a mother, a word that had come to feel like a job title. But now, in his devastation, he was a child again, appealing to the one person he believed existed solely to fix his problems, to provide his comfort. And for a heart-stopping second, the old programming kicked in. The instinct to soothe, to gather him in my arms, to promise him that everything would be all right, that I would make it all right. The guilt, which had been a stone, now became a fire, threatening to consume me from the inside out. But then I looked into his eyes. And I saw it. The calculation, the manipulation, the subtle, almost imperceptible shift from aggressor to victim. He wasn't homeless. He and Chloe lived in a beautiful, 3,000 square foot condo in the best part of town, a condo they owned. What he meant was, they didn't have the beach house. They didn't have the second home, the one they felt was theirs by divine right, the one they had already, in their minds, renovated, furnished, and moved into. His words hung between us in the charged air. We don't have a place to live. And I understood, with a clarity that was both terrible and liberating, the fundamental, unbridgeable chasm that now separated us. He was talking about property. I was talking about a person. He saw a portfolio that had been mismanaged. I saw a soul that had been saved. I didn't say anything. I just held his gaze. The silence stretched, taut and electric. The rain hammered against the windows, a frantic percussion to our standoff. He was waiting for me to break, to apologize, to offer him the money, to crumple. I did not. The realization that I wasn't going to fix this, that the well was truly, finally dry, dawned on his face. The broken child vanished, and the cold, angry stranger returned. Without another word, he turned, walked out the door, and disappeared back into the storm. The door swung shut, not with a slam, but with a soft, definitive click. And I was alone. I stood there for a long time, listening to the storm rage outside. I waited for the collapse, for the sobs to rack my body, for the regret to tear me apart. But it didn't come. Instead, the silence in the house changed. The heavy, waiting silence was gone. In its place was a new silence. It was vast, and empty, and clean. It was the silence of a field after a wildfire has swept through. Everything was ash. Everything was gone. But the air was clear. And for the first time, you could see the horizon. I had done it. I had burned it all down. I had committed the unforgivable. And I was still standing. The weeks that followed were a journey through a strange, new landscape. The silence was my constant companion. The phone did not ring. The doorbell was still. The texts and emails, which had once been a constant stream of requests and updates, ceased. I had been excommunicated. At first, the quiet was deafening. The ghosts were loud. I'd hear Michael's voice in the creak of a floorboard. I'd see David's small, trusting face in an old photograph. The guilt would rise up in waves, so powerful it would steal my breath. I was a monster. A selfish, horrible old woman who had chosen money over her own flesh and blood. I would pace the empty rooms, my own personal prison. I'd pick up the phone a dozen times, my finger hovering over his number, ready to capitulate, to beg for forgiveness, to wire every last cent to his account. But I didn't. Something had shifted inside me, a fundamental tectonic plate of my being. The act of selling the properties, as brutal as it was, had been an act of self-definition. To undo it would be to create myself. So, I started to walk. I walked for miles, through neighborhoods I hadn't seen in years, through parks, along busy streets. I was a ghost among the living, observing. I saw other mothers with their children, and I felt a pang, not of jealousy, but of a deep, weary recognition. I saw the same patterns, the same tired smiles, the same slow erosion of self in their eyes. I started to clean, not the frantic, nervous cleaning of a woman expecting guests, but a slow, deliberate archaeology of my own life. I tackled the attic. I found boxes of David's old things, report cards, finger paintings, a dried-out sea star from the beach. I didn't throw them away. I simply looked at them, acknowledged them, and put them back. They were part of my history, but they were no longer my anchors. I found a box of Michael's things, tucked away in a corner. I hadn't had the strength to open it after he died. Now, I did. His old flannel shirt, still holding the faint, ghostly scent of his cologne. A bundle of love letters we'd written to each other. A book of poetry by Rilke, his favorite, the pages soft and dog-eared. I sat on the dusty floorboards, the light from the single bulb casting long shadows, and I read. I read his letters. I read the poems he had underlined, and I came across a line, one he had circled again and again. The pencil mark now faded. The purpose of life is to be defeated by greater and greater things. I read it once, twice, a dozen times. And I began to weep, not the harsh, guilty sobs I had expected, but a soft, releasing flow of tears. I had been defeated, by grief, by duty, by the overwhelming, crushing weight of a love that had asked for everything and given nothing back. But in my defeat, I had found a greater thing. Myself. The decision to buy the van wasn't a decision. It was an inevitability. I saw it online, a small, white, unassuming thing. A VW camper. It looked like freedom. I drove to a dealership 2 towns over, a place where no one knew me as David's mother or Michael's widow. I paid in cash. The salesman's eyes widened slightly, but he asked no questions. I spent the next month outfitting it. It became my project, my obsession. A small, comfortable bed, a tiny kitchenette with a propane stove, a bookshelf for my novels, a box for my terrible watercolors. It was my sanctuary, my spaceship, my turtle shell. I was building a new, mobile home for Sarah, the woman who had been in cold storage for 40 years. I was in the van, parked in my own driveway, testing out the bed, when my phone rang. It was Chloe. Her voice was ice cold, dripping with a triumphant venom. "We're leaving tomorrow," she said. "No greeting. No pretense. Your beach house has already been sold. Bye." I actually smiled. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. The childish, petty attempt to wound me. They had sold a house that was no longer mine to sell. It was a performance, a play act of power and control. They were trying to make me feel the loss they felt, and I realized, with a joy that was almost dizzying, that they no longer could. Their weapons were useless against me. I was no longer on their battlefield. I replied, my voice calm, laced with a faint, genuine amusement. "But you forgot one thing." I could hear her sharp intake of breath, the confusion on the other end of the line. "What are you talking about?" And I laughed. I laughed a real, deep, from-the-belly laugh that felt like scrubbing my insides clean. It was the laugh of a free woman. "The house you sold," I said, my voice clear and strong, carrying a strength I didn't know I possessed. "It was actually sold by me, 6 weeks ago. The new owners are lovely. They're artists." The silence on the other end was absolute, a void of stunned, defeated fury. "I'm going away for a while," I continued, not waiting for a response. "I'll let you know when I'm settled." I ended the call. I placed the phone on the passenger seat. I started the engine of my little white van. I pulled out of the driveway, away from the house that was now just a house, away from the life that was no longer my life. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing back there for me anymore. I was driving east, towards the mountains, towards a sunrise I had not yet seen. It has been a year now. A year of waking up in a different bed, to a different view. I have woken up to the deep, green silence of redwood forests, where the light falls in dappled coins through the canopy. I have woken up to the stark, breathtaking emptiness of the desert, where the sky is so vast it makes you feel both infinitesimally small and profoundly connected to everything. I have woken up to the salty mist of a new coastline, to the sound of unfamiliar birds, to the smell of pine needles and damp earth and my own coffee brewing on a tiny stove. My life is small now. It fits in a van. And in that smallness, I have found an infinite expansion. The money from the sales. I did not hoard it like a dragon on a pile of gold, as I'm sure they think I have. I used it to live, to fuel this journey. But I also did something else, something that felt like the final, necessary act of alchemy, of turning the lead of that bitter conflict into gold. I set up a scholarship fund, in Michael's name. It's for single parents who want to go back to school, to learn a trade, to become something more for themselves and their children. It is completely anonymous. Every month, I get an email report. I read about a young man studying to be an electrician, a mother of 2 becoming a nurse, a father getting his degree in social work. This money, which was the source of such poison, such entitlement, such heartbreak, is now a source of quiet, relentless grace. It is building futures. It is funding dreams. It is a legacy Michael would have wept with joy over. It is not a legacy of brick and mortar, but of hope and opportunity. It is a river, finally flowing to the right places. And David? He called me, 3 months ago. I was parked by a lake in Montana, painting the reflection of the mountains in the water. My phone, which I keep mostly for emergencies and these monthly reports, lit up with his name. My heart did not clench with fear. It stirred with curiosity. His voice was different. The anger was gone. The condescension was gone. In its place was a bewildered, hesitant respect. He had done his research, he said. He had seen the records. He had, I think, been forced to confront the reality that my actions were not a senile whim, but a deliberate, calculated reinvention. "Mom," he said, his voice cautious. "Where are you?" "I'm everywhere," I said, and it was the truth. "And I'm nowhere. I'm happy." We talked for almost an hour. It was the first real, honest conversation we'd had since he was a teenager. I didn't apologize for what I did. I explained it. I told him about the photograph I found in the attic. I told him about the frozen years, about the woman I had buried under the weight of my grief and my duty. I told him that in trying to be his everything, I had forgotten how to be my own anything, and in doing so, I had taught him the most tragic lesson of all, that a mother's love is a transaction. There is no fairy tale ending. We are not planning family reunions. The wounds are too deep, the scars too thick for that. But there is a new, fragile thing between us. A mutual recognition. He sees me now, not as a function, not as a resource, but as a person. A person who is flawed, who made catastrophic mistakes, but who is, finally, terrifyingly, authentically alive. Yesterday, I was on a beach in the Pacific Northwest. It was not my beach. The sand was darker, the waves were colder, the air smelled of fir trees and salt. I was trying, and failing, to capture the strange, silver light of the overcast sky in my watercolor. My painting was a mess, a blur of grey and green and blue. It was awful, and I loved it. My phone was off. The world was just me, the waves, the goals, and my terrible, beautiful painting. And I felt it, a peace so profound, so deeply earned, that it felt like the truest thing I had ever known. I had to lose my son to find myself, and in finding myself, I may have, just maybe, given him back the mother he never really had, a whole one. The moral of this story, my long, messy, controversial confession, is not that you should sell your children's inheritance. It's not about property or money at all. It is about the soul's desperate, non-negotiable need for its own territory. You cannot give what you do not have, and if you have given yourself away, piece by piece, until nothing remains, then the love you offer is just an echo, a habit, a ghost. Forgiveness. This was the final frontier. I had to forgive my son for his blindness, for his entitlement, but the hardest, most vital work was forgiving myself. Forgiving myself for the years I spent asleep at the wheel of my own life. Forgiving myself for choosing to wake up, even when it meant causing an earthquake. True forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was okay. It's about untangling your self-worth from what happened. It's about understanding that we are all, every one of us, fumbling in the dark, doing the best we can with the broken maps we were given. My story is not for everyone. Many will hear it and call me a monster. They will say I failed as a mother. And they may be right. But I am no longer a mother first. I am a person. A free person. A whole person. For the first time since I held my son in my arms and felt the terrifying, beautiful, all-consuming weight of that love, I am truly, completely, undeniably alive. And sometimes, the most loving, the most difficult, the most sacred thing you can do for your children is to show them what it looks like to finally, fearlessly, come home to yourself.